Kyle Morrison had been working in the asteroid mines for 3 years, and every single day felt like it was trying to kill him slowly. But the pay was decent, and nobody asked questions about where you came from or what you were running away from. The bar on Station 7 was called the Rusty Comet, and it was the kind of place where fights happened every night and nobody bothered to clean up the blood until morning because there would just be more blood tomorrow anyway. Kyle sat at the corner table with his crew, and they were celebrating because they had hit a good vein of platinum that day, and the bonus money meant they could afford to get properly drunk instead of just regular drunk. That was when the 3 men from the rival mining company walked in, and their leader was a big guy named Frank, who had been looking for an excuse to fight Kyle for months now because Kyle had dated his sister once, and it had not ended. Well, Frank walked right up to their table and knocked over Kyle's drink and said something about his mother that was probably not true, but definitely made everyone stop talking. Kyle looked up at Frank and smiled because he had been having a bad week, and sometimes the only thing that made you feel better was hitting something that deserved it. He stood up slow and said something back about Frank's sister that was definitely true and probably should not have been said out loud, and then Frank swung first, which meant Kyle could say it was self-defense later. They crashed through 2 tables and Kyle got in a good hit to Frank's ribs before the other 2 guys jumped in, and suddenly it was 3 against 1, which was not fair, but life on the mining stations was never fair anyway. Kyle managed to break a chair over one guy's back and kick another one in the knee, but then Frank got him in a headlock, and everything started going dark around the edges. That was when Kyle saw her for the first time. She was sitting at a table near the back wall, and she did not look like she belonged anywhere near a mining station bar because her skin was too pale and perfect, and her ears came to points that meant she was one of the elf people from the core worlds. But what really caught his attention were the 2 dragons coiled at her feet. They were small by dragon standards, probably only about the size of large dogs, but their scales shimmered with colors that did not exist in normal light, and their eyes glowed green like toxic waste except beautiful. The elf woman was watching the fight with an expression of mild interest, like she was watching a boring show on television, and could change the channel anytime she wanted. Kyle knew he was about to pass out from the headlock, but his stupid brain decided this was the perfect time to do something even stupider than usual. He managed to gasp out loud enough for everyone to hear him say, "Will you marry me?" And he was looking right at the elf woman when he said it. The entire bar went silent. Frank let go of the headlock because he was too confused to keep choking someone, and Kyle fell to his knees gasping for air and wondering why his brain hated him so much. The elf woman raised one eyebrow and her dragons lifted their heads and made a sound like wind through caves. She stood up in one smooth motion, and suddenly everyone in the bar took a step back because there was something about the way she moved that said she could kill you without even thinking hard about it. "Why would I marry a human who cannot even win a simple bar fight?" she asked, and her voice sounded like music made out of knives. Kyle got to his feet even though his legs were shaking and his ribs hurt, and he was pretty sure he was bleeding from somewhere, because I am the only one in this entire bar brave enough to ask, he said and grinned even though it hurt his split lip. The dragons made that sound again, but this time it sounded almost like laughing. The elf woman walked closer and her dragons followed her, and their claws clicked on the metal floor and everyone got out of her way fast. She stopped right in front of Kyle and looked him up and down like she was deciding whether he was worth the trouble of talking to. "I am Lyra of the Silverwood clan," she said, "and we do not marry humans and we do not take jokes about marriage lightly." Kyle wiped blood from his mouth and looked into her glowing green eyes and realized he might have made the biggest mistake of his entire life, which was saying something because he had made a lot of mistakes. "Then I apologize," he said, because even he knew when he had gone too far. But Lyra did not move away, and her expression changed into something that might have been a smile, except it had too many sharp edges. "Too late, human," she said quietly. "You made an offer in front of witnesses, and by the old laws of my people I can either accept it or challenge you to prove your worth." "What does challenge mean?" Kyle asked. But he was pretty sure he already knew the answer. "It means, you fight my dragons," she said, and her smile got wider. "Or you accept an alternative test of worthiness." Kyle looked at the dragons and they looked back at him with eyes that said they had never lost a fight and were not planning to start now. "What kind of alternative test?" he asked carefully. You serve my house for 1 year, she said, and if you survive that year, I will consider giving you a real answer to your proposal. Kyle thought about his life in the mines, which was slowly grinding him down into nothing, and he thought about the way Lyra looked at him like he was interesting instead of just another stupid human. He also thought about the fact that her dragons could probably eat him in one bite if she told them to. Deal, he said before. He could talk himself out of it. Lyra laughed then, and it was a real laugh, not a cruel one, and the sound made something in Kyle's chest feel strange. You are either very brave or very stupid. Kyle Morrison, she said. How do you know my name? He asked, surprised. I know many things, she said. Her dragons moved closer, and one of them sniffed at Kyle's hand, and he held very still because he did not want to lose any fingers. The dragon made a low rumbling sound, and then pressed its head against Kyle's palm. Lyra's eyes went wide. He likes you, she said, and she sounded shocked. Is that bad? Kyle asked. Dragons do not like humans, she said slowly. They tolerate them sometimes, but they do not seek touch from them. What does it mean? Kyle asked. It means, Lyra said that perhaps you are more interesting than I thought. She turned and walked toward the door, and her dragons followed, and after a second, Kyle followed too, because what else was he going to do? Frank and his friends were still standing there with their mouths open, and Kyle gave them a little wave as he walked past. Outside, the station corridor was cold and sterile, and full of the constant hum of life support systems. Lyra stopped and looked at Kyle with an expression he could not read. Do you understand what you have agreed to? She asked. Not really, Kyle admitted. Good, she said. If you understood, you would run and I would lose respect for you. Where are we going? Kyle asked. To my ship, she said. And then to Silverwood. What is Silverwood? Kyle asked. My home, she said, and possibly your grave. Lyra's ship was nothing like the mining vessels Kyle was used to, and the moment he stepped through the airlock, he knew he was in a completely different world. The walls were made of some kind of living wood that should not have been able to exist in space, but somehow did, and it glowed softly with inner light that changed colors like a sunset that never ended. The dragons ran ahead, making happy sounds, and disappeared into the depths of the ship, and Kyle just stood there trying to process what he was seeing. Stop gaping like a fish, Lyra said, but she did not sound annoyed. This is what ships looked like before your people decided everything had to be metal and efficient. It's beautiful, Kyle said honestly. Lyra glanced at him with something that might have been approval. Come, she said, you need medical attention, and then we need to talk about what you have gotten yourself into. She led him through corridors that twisted in ways that did not make sense, and finally into a room that was somehow both a medical bay and a garden at the same time. Plants grew from the walls and ceiling, and the air smelled like rain and earth and something Kyle could not name, but made him feel calm. Sit, Lyra commanded, and pointed at a chair that grew out of the floor. Kyle sat and watched as she opened a cabinet that was actually a hollow in the wall and pulled out supplies that looked nothing like the medical kits he knew. This will sting, she warned, and then pressed something that felt like cool moss against his split lip. It stung, like she said. But then the pain faded, and when she pulled the moss away, his lip felt completely healed. What is that stuff? Kyle asked, touching his lip carefully. Old magic. Lyra said, your people forgot it when you decided science was the only truth, but my people never forgot that some things work better when you do not try to explain them. She cleaned the rest of his injuries, and Kyle watched her work and noticed that her hands were steady and careful, and that she hummed something under her breath that might have been a song. Why did you really agree to come with me? She asked suddenly. Without looking up, Kyle thought about lying, but something told him that would be a mistake with someone like her. Because my life in the mines was killing me slowly, he said, and because when you looked at me I felt like maybe I was worth something more than just digging rocks out of dead asteroids. Lyra stopped working and looked at him directly, and her green eyes seemed to see right through him. That is a better answer than I expected, she said quietly. Most humans would have made jokes or tried to sound tough. I am too tired to be tough, Kyle said, and jokes are what got me into this mess in the first place. Ira almost smiled and then went back to work on a cut on his arm. I should explain what you have agreed to, she said. My people are dying, Kyle. Not quickly and not obviously, but we are fading away like morning fog when the sun rises. Kyle frowned, confused. You "Look pretty alive to me," he said. "Our bodies are fine," she said. "But our bloodlines are weakening with every generation, and fewer of our children can bond with dragons and without dragons. We are just long-lived people with pointed ears." "Why? Do you need dragons?" Kyle asked. "Because they are part of us," she said simply. "We evolved together millions of years ago, and we are connected in ways your scientists would call symbiotic, but we just call it being complete." "What does that have to do with me?" Kyle asked. Lyra finished bandaging his arm and sat back looking at him thoughtfully. "Dragons have not willingly touched a human in over 1,000 years," she said. "But Ash touched you, and he did it because he wanted to. Not because I told him to." "Ash is the dragon," Kyle guessed. Lyra nodded. "Ash and Ember are bonded to me, and they are my companions and my family, and they do not trust easily. But Ash touched you," she repeated, "which means he sensed something in you that interested him." Kyle looked at his hand, remembering the feeling of the dragon scales under his palm. "I heard something," he admitted. "When I touched him, it was like a voice made of feelings, and it said, 'Brave, stupid, small thing.'" Lyra's eyes went very wide, and she stood up suddenly. "He spoke to you," she whispered. "Is that bad?" Kyle asked. "Starting to worry. Dragons only speak to those they consider worthy," she said, and her voice shook slightly. "And they have not considered a human worthy since before the Great War." "What Great War?" Kyle asked, but Lyra was pacing now and muttering to herself in a language he did not understand. Finally, she stopped and looked at Kyle with an expression that was equal parts excitement and fear. "This changes everything," she said. "What changes everything?" Kyle asked, getting frustrated. Lyra took a deep breath. "I brought you with me because I thought it would be amusing to watch a cocky human learn some humility while serving my house. But if Ash spoke to you, then you might actually be able to do what we need." "Which is what Kyle asked." "Bond with a dragon," she said simply. Kyle laughed because he thought she was joking, but Lyra did not laugh, and her expression stayed serious. "Wait, you are serious?" he said. "Very serious," she replied. "Our people need new blood, new genetics, new possibilities, and for centuries we have tried breeding programs and genetic manipulation, and nothing works. But dragons do not lie, and if Ash thinks you are worthy, then maybe the answer we have been looking for is not in our own people." "You want me to bond with a dragon?" Kyle said slowly, trying to understand. "I want you to try," Lyra said. "It has never been done successfully, but that does not mean it cannot be done." "What happens if it does not work?" Kyle asked. "You will probably die," she said matter-of-factly, "or go insane or get burned to ash or any number of other unpleasant outcomes." Kyle should have been scared, but instead he felt something like excitement building in his chest. "And if it does work," he asked, "then you become the first human dragon keeper in recorded history," Lyra said, "and you help save my people from fading away. Also," she added with that sharp smile, "I might actually marry you." Kyle laughed, and this time Lyra smiled too. "You know, when I made that joke proposal, I was just trying to distract the guys who were beating me up," he said. "I know," Lyra said, "but the universe has a sense of humor, and sometimes jokes become destiny." The ship shuddered slightly, and Lyra looked up. "We are approaching Silverwood," she said. "You should prepare yourself for what?" Kyle asked. "For my family," she said. "They are going to hate you at first." "At first," Kyle repeated. "If you survive long enough, they will respect you," Lyra said. "My people value strength and courage above almost everything else, and if you can prove you have both, then they will accept you." "And if I cannot prove it?" Kyle asked. "Then they will probably feed you to the wild dragons," Lyra said cheerfully. "You are joking, right?" Kyle asked. Lyra just smiled and walked toward the door. "Come, meet Ash and Ember properly," she said over her shoulder. "If you are going to try bonding with a dragon, you should at least know how to talk to one without making them want to eat." Kyle followed her, thinking that his life had gotten very strange. Very quickly, but also that strange was better than slowly dying in a mineshaft. Silverwood was not what Kyle expected, and he had been expecting something pretty amazing already. The planet hung in space like a green jewel wrapped in silver clouds, and as they got closer, Kyle could see that the entire surface was covered in forests that seemed to glow with their own light. "No cities," he said, surprised. We do not build cities like humans do, Lyra explained as she guided the ship down through the atmosphere. We grow our homes and they become part of the forest. And the forest becomes part of us. The ship landed in a clearing surrounded by trees that were easily 1,000 feet tall, and their trunks were wide enough that you could have parked a spaceship inside them. Lyra stood, and her dragons appeared from wherever they had been hiding and pressed against her legs like cats. Ready, she asked Kyle. No, he said honestly, but let's go anyway. The moment Kyle stepped off the ship, he felt something change in the air around him, and it was like the entire forest was watching him and deciding whether he was a threat. The trees whispered, even though there was no wind, and Kyle heard voices that were not quite voices speaking in a language he did not understand but somehow felt in his bones. They are testing you, Lyra said, quietly. The forest is alive and aware and it protects us. What should I do? Kyle asked. Nothing, she said. Just be yourself. And do not show fear. A group of elves emerged from the trees, and Kyle had never seen people move so gracefully and so silently, and their eyes were all the same glowing green as Lyra's. At the front of the group was a woman who looked like an older version of Lyra, except her expression was much colder, and her eyes held no warmth at all. Mother Lyra said, and bowed her head slightly. The older woman looked at Kyle the way someone might look at a bug they found in their food. You brought a human here, she said, and her voice could have frozen fire. I brought a potential solution. Kyle Morrison, meet my mother, Elena, keeper of the Silverwood, dragons and leader of our clan. Elena walked closer to Kyle and circled him slowly, and he forced himself to stand still, even though every instinct told him to run. He smells of metal and violence and desperation. She said, exactly what we do not need. He also spoke to Ash, Lyra said calmly. That made everyone go silent, and Elena stopped circling and stared at her daughter. Impossible, she said flatly. Dragons do not speak to humans, Ash did. Lyra insisted, and he initiated contact, which never happens, unless the dragon senses something worthy. Elena looked at Kyle again, and this time her expression was more calculating than dismissive. If this is true, she said slowly, then we must test him properly. What kind of test? Kyle asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The bonding chamber, Elena said. If he survives that, then we will know the dragons truly accept him. Lyra put a hand on Kyle's arm, and he could feel her tension. Mother, that is too dangerous, she said. We should start with smaller interactions. Work up to a full bonding attempt. We do not have time for caution. Elena snapped. Our people fade with every passing year, and if this human truly has potential, then we must know now. She turned and walked back toward the trees, and the other elves followed. And after a moment, Lyra sighed and gestured for Kyle to follow. To what is the bonding chamber? Kyle whispered as they walked. A place where young elves go to meet dragons for the first time. Lyra whispered back, it tests whether you have the mental strength to connect with a dragon's mind without being overwhelmed. What happens if you get overwhelmed? Kyle asked. Madness, she said quietly. Or death. Usually death. Kyle wanted to ask why she had brought him here if this was so dangerous, but he already knew the answer because he had seen the sadness in her eyes when she talked about her people dying. They walked for what felt like hours through the glowing forest, and Kyle saw things he could not explain, like streams that flowed upward and flowers that sang, and creatures that were definitely not anything he had ever seen in biology books. Finally, they came to a massive tree that was even bigger than the others, and it had a door carved into its trunk that looked like it had been there for thousands of years. The bonding chamber, Elena announced. Enter, human, and we will see if you are worth the air you breathe. Kyle looked at Lyra, and she looked worried, but also hopeful. I believe in you, she said quietly. That is probably a mistake, Kyle said, but he tried to smile. Probably, she agreed. But sometimes mistakes turn out to be the best decisions we ever make. Kyle walked to the door, and it opened by itself, and inside was darkness that seemed deeper than normal darkness, like it went on forever. He stepped through and heard the door close behind him, and suddenly he was alone in the dark, and the only sound was his own breathing. Then he heard the dragons. They came from everywhere at once, voices in his head that were not voices, and feelings that were too big for feelings, and he fell to his knees because it was like being hit by a wave of pure emotion. Fear, anger, curiosity, hunger, love, hate, joy, pain. Everything all at once, and Kyle screamed because his mind was not built to handle this much input. But then he remembered something his father had told him before he died, that the only way to survive overwhelming odds was to find one small thing you could control and focus on. That Kyle focused on his breathing, in and out, slow and steady. Dragon voices tried to sweep him away, but he held on to his breathing like a lifeline, in and out. And slowly, very slowly, he started to hear individual voices instead of just chaos. One dragon was ancient and tired, another was young and playful, a third was angry at something Kyle could not understand. He reached out carefully with his mind, not trying to control them, just trying to understand them. And one by one, the dragons stopped overwhelming him and started actually communicating. The youngest one came closest in his mind, and Kyle felt curiosity from it, like a child asking questions. "What are you?" it seemed to ask. "I am Kyle," he thought back. "I am human and I am scared, but I am trying." The young dragon considered this, and then Kyle felt something like approval. "Brave," it said. Stupid but brave. Kyle almost laughed because that was exactly what Ash had said. The door opened and light flooded in, and Kyle realized he was lying on the ground, covered in sweat and shaking, but he was alive, and he was sane. Lyra ran in and helped him sit up, and her face was full of relief. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it." Elena appeared in the doorway, and for the first time her expression was not cold. 3 hours, she said. "You survived 3 hours in the chamber, when most elf children can only manage 1 hour on their first attempt." Kyle tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Elena gestured, and another elf brought water, and Kyle drank it gratefully. "You have proven you can hear the dragons," she said. "Now, we must see if you can truly bond with one, but not today," she added. "Today you rest, tomorrow we begin your real training." Kyle looked at Lyra, and she was smiling properly now. Not just that sharp smile, but a real one. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Kyle asked. "For not giving up," she said. "For being stubborn enough to survive. It's what humans do best." Kyle said, "We are too stupid to know when to quit." Lyra laughed and helped him to his feet. "Come," she said. "I will show you where you will stay." As they walked away, Kyle heard one of the other elves say to Elena, "Do you really think a human can save us?" Elena was quiet for a moment and then said, "I do not know, but for the first time in a century I have hope. And sometimes hope is enough to start with." Kyle woke up in a room that had grown itself around him while he slept. And for a moment he thought the last day had been a dream, but then his body reminded him it was very real by hurting everywhere. The walls were living wood that breathed softly, and the bed was made of moss that was somehow more comfortable than any mattress Kyle had ever known. And through the window he could see 3 moons hanging in a sky that was still dark. Someone knocked on the door, except the knock came from inside. "The wood itself, come in," Kyle said, and Lyra entered carrying a tray with food that smelled amazing. "You survived the night," she said, setting the tray down. "That is actually impressive because the bonding chamber usually leaves people unable to sleep." "For days I was too tired to not sleep," Kyle said, sitting up and wincing. "How long was I out?" 18 hours, Lyra said. "My mother was starting to think you had fallen into a coma." Kyle looked at the food and realized he was starving. "What is this?" he asked, pointing at something that looked like bread but glowed slightly. "Forest bread," Lyra said. "Made from grain that grows in the deep woods, where the oldest trees live. It will help restore your strength." Kyle took a bite, and the taste was like nothing he had ever experienced, and he could feel energy flowing back into his body with each bite. "This is amazing," he said with his mouth full. Lyra smiled and sat down in a chair that grew out of the floor. "You have 2 days to recover," she said. "Then your training begins properly." "What kind of training?" Kyle asked. "Physical, mental, and spiritual." Lyra said bonding with a dragon requires all 3 to be in perfect balance. "How long does training usually take?" Kyle asked. "For our people, it starts when they are children and takes 10 years, Lyra said calmly. We do not have 10 years, Kyle said. No, Lyra agreed. We have 6 months. That is impossible, Kyle said. Probably, Lyra said. But you are human, and humans have a gift for doing impossible things when they are desperate enough for. The next weeks, Kyle learned what it meant to train with the elves, and it was harder than anything he had ever done in his life. Every morning before the suns rose, he ran through the forest with Lyra and her dragons, and the forest tried to kill him with roots that grabbed at his feet and branches that swung at his head. This is insane. Kyle gasped after tripping for the 10th time. This is basic survival training, Lyra said, not even breathing hard. The forest tests you because dragons will test you harder. After running came combat training with Elena herself, and she moved like water and hit like stone. And Kyle spent more time on the ground than on his feet. You fight like a brawler, she said, standing over him after knocking him down. Again, all strength and no grace. I learned to fight in bars, Kyle said. Spitting blood, there was not much grace involved. Then unlearn it. Elena commanded. Dragons respect skill, not just force. The afternoons were spent in meditation, and this was somehow harder than the physical training because Kyle had never been good at sitting still. You must quiet your mind, Lyra said as they sat by a stream that sang. A dragon's thoughts are loud and chaotic. And if your mind is not calm, they will overwhelm you. My mind does not do calm, Kyle said, frustrated. Then learn. Lyra said simply, or fail. Kyle tried and failed and tried again, and slowly, very slowly, he started to understand what she meant. It was not about emptying your mind. It was about finding stillness, in the middle of chaos, like being in the eye of a storm where everything was calm. Even though destruction swirled all around, one day after a particularly brutal training session, Elena called Kyle to her home, which was built inside a tree so large it could have held a spaceship. Sit, she commanded, and Kyle sat. You have been here for 1 month, she said, and you have not died. Which is more than I expected. Thank you, Kyle said. Not sure if that was a compliment. Do not thank me. Yet, Elena said. The real test comes tomorrow. What test? Kyle asked. You will meet Spark, she said. He is a young dragon who has not yet bonded with anyone, and he has agreed to see if you are worthy. Kyle's heart started beating faster. What happens if he decides I am not worthy? Then, you will be burned, Elena said matter-of-factly, or eaten or simply rejected, and if a dragon rejects you, the pain is supposed to be worse than death. Great, Kyle muttered. But Elena smiled slightly, and it was the first time Kyle had seen her smile. I do not think he will reject you, she said. You have the stubbornness that dragons admire. And Ash speaks well of you to the others. Ash talks about me? Kyle asked. Surprised, dragons gossip more than elves do, Elena said, and Ash thinks you are entertaining, which is high praise from a dragon. That night, Kyle could not sleep, and he sat by his window watching the moons and thinking about his life. 6 months ago, he had been digging rocks out of asteroids and drinking cheap beer and waiting to die. Now he was on an alien planet learning to bond with dragons and maybe saving an entire species. Life was strange. Lyra found him there just before dawn. Nervous, she asked. Terrified, Kyle admitted. Good, she said. Fear means you understand the stakes. She sat beside him, and they watched the sky change colors as the sun started to rise. Can I ask you something? Kyle said. Lyra nodded. Why do you care so much about saving your people? She said. I mean, obviously they are your people, but you seem different from the others. Lyra was quiet for a long time. I am the last of my family line, she said finally. My father died in the war with the Kreth, and my siblings never bonded with dragons and faded young. I am the only one left who carries our specific bloodline, and when I die, it dies with me. I am sorry, Kyle said. Lyra shook her head. Do not be sorry, she said. Just succeed, because if you can bond with Spark, then maybe others like you can bond with other dragons, and maybe we can bring new life to our people. No pressure, Kyle said, trying to joke. Lyra looked at him seriously. I know this is not fair to you, she said. You made a stupid joke in a bar, and now the fate of an entire species rests on your shoulders. Yeah, Kyle agreed. But honestly, it is better than dying slowly in the mines. They sat together watching the dawn, and then Lyra stood. It is time, she said. Spark is waiting. Kyle followed her deep into the forest to a place where the trees grew so close together that barely any light came through, in a clearing that glowed. With bioluminescent moss sat a dragon. Spark was bigger than ash and ember, and his scales were the color of fire, and his eyes were gold instead of green. He looked at Kyle, and Kyle felt the weight of that gaze like physical pressure. Brave, stupid, small. Thing Spark said in Kyle's mind, and his voice was younger than ash but no less powerful. That seems to be the general opinion. Kyle thought back. Spark made a sound like laughter. Lyra says you want to bond. She said, Lyra wants me to bond. Kyle corrected, just want to not die. More laughter from Spark. Honest, she said. I like honest. Do you want to bond? Spark asked directly. Kyle thought about lying, thought about saying whatever would make the dragon happy. But he remembered what Elena said about dragons, respecting honesty. I do not know, Kyle admitted. I do not understand what bonding means, really. But I know Lyra's. People are dying. And I know I survived the bonding chamber, and I know that if there is a chance I can help, then I have to try. Because that is what humans do. We try. Even when it is stupid. Especially when it is stupid. Spark moved closer until his massive head was inches from Kyle. Put your hand on my head, he commanded. Kyle reached out slowly and placed his hand on Spark's scales. And the world exploded into light and sound and feeling. Kyle felt Spark's mind rush into his like a flood, and he felt everything. The dragon felt hunger for flight, loneliness from not having a bond, hope that maybe this strange human could be what he needed. Kyle pushed back with his own feelings, fear of failure, determination to succeed, and underneath everything else, a stubborn refusal to give up. Their minds met somewhere in the middle, and the bond formed. It felt like coming home. Kyle opened his eyes and realized he was lying on the ground again, but this time it felt different because he could feel Spark in his mind, like a presence that was separate, but also part of him. The dragon was looking down at him with golden eyes that now felt familiar instead of terrifying. You did not break, Spark said with satisfaction. Most humans would have shattered like glass. I am too stubborn to break. Kyle thought back and was surprised when Spark heard him. Good, Spark rumbled. I do not want a weak bond partner. Kyle sat up slowly and saw that Lyra was crying, but she was smiling at the same time. You did it, she whispered. You actually bonded with a dragon. How long was I out? Kyle asked. 3 days, Lyra said. We were starting to worry that the bond had killed you, but you came back. Kyle tried to stand and immediately fell over because his legs did not work. Right. Spark made a concerned noise and nudged Kyle with his nose. Our bond is new. The dragon said, it will take time for your body to adjust to having my presence in your mind. How much time? Kyle asked. Weeks, Spark said. Maybe months. We will learn together. Over the next month, Kyle discovered what it meant to be bonded to a dragon. And it was wonderful and terrible at the same time. Wonderful, because he could feel Spark's emotions and thoughts, and it was like having a best friend who understood you completely. Terrible because sometimes Spark's instincts took over, and Kyle would suddenly feel overwhelming hunger, or the need to fly even. Though he did not have wings, learning to control the bond took practice. Spark would share memories of flying, and Kyle would feel like he was soaring through the sky. Even though his feet never left the ground, Kyle would share memories of his time in the mines, and Spark would feel the claustrophobia and the grinding, repetitive despair. They learned each other, and slowly they became more than just human and dragon. They became something new. The elves watched this with fascination and fear. Some, like Lyra and Elena, saw hope in what Kyle represented. Others saw a threat to their traditions and their way of life. One day, an elf named Marcus approached Kyle while he was training with Spark. You should not be here, he said coldly. This is not your world, and these are not your dragons. Spark growled low in his throat, and Kyle felt the dragon's anger like heat. Easy, Kyle thought too. Spark, let me handle this. He turned to Marcus and kept his voice calm. I did not ask to be here, he said, but I am here, and I bonded with Spark, and that means something whether you like it or not. You bonded through luck, Marcus spat. Any human could do what you did if they were stubborn enough. Then let them try, Kyle said. If other humans can bond, Then your people are. Saved is that not what matters? Marcus looked like he wanted to argue more, but Elena appeared from the trees. Enough, she said sharply. Kyle has proven himself, and jealousy does not become you. Marcus left, but Kyle could feel his anger and resentment. Some will never accept you, Lyra said later. They fear change, and you represent the biggest change our people have faced in centuries. Kyle sat with Spark and ran his hand over the dragon's scales. Do you think more humans can bond? He asked. I do not know, Lyra admitted. You are the first in over 1,000 years we have to try. Kyle said, that was always the plan, right? Bring more humans here and see if they can bond too. Lyra nodded slowly. My mother is already making arrangements, she said. But Kyle, you must understand what you have started. If this works, then our entire society will change, elves and humans bonding with dragons together. Some of my people see that as salvation. Others see it as the end of everything. Change is always scary, Kyle said. But the alternative is extinction. Is that really better? Lyra smiled sadly. You sound like me, she said. That is what I have been telling my people for years, but hearing it from you somehow makes it more real. 3 months after the bonding, the first group of humans arrived. They came from mining stations and colony worlds, and they all had that same desperate look. Kyle remembered seeing in his own mirror volunteers. Lyra explained people who have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Kyle helped train them because he understood them in a way the elves never could. He knew what it was like to feel worthless, to feel like your life was just grinding down to nothing, and he knew what it felt like to discover you could be more. Out of the first 20 humans, only 3 successfully bonded. It was a low success rate, but it was 3 more bonded pairs than the elves had managed in the last decade, and that gave everyone hope. Kyle watched as a woman named Chen bonded with a dragon called Whisper, and he saw the same wonder in her eyes that he had felt with Spark. This could actually work. He said to Lyra, it is working, she corrected. You did this. Kyle, you proved it was possible. Elena called a gathering of the clan, and all the elves came together under the largest tree in the forest. Kyle stood with Spark at his side, and the other human dragon pairs stood with him. Elena raised her hands for silence. For centuries we have been fading, she said, our bloodlines weakening, our numbers shrinking. We accepted this as our fate. But fate can be changed. She gestured to Kyle and the others. These humans have shown us that dragons do not only bond with elves, they bond with those who are worthy. And worth is not determined by blood or species. It is determined by courage and heart, and the willingness to try. Some elves cheered. Others remained silent, but everyone listened. We stand at a crossroads, Elena continued. We can cling to the old ways and fade into history, or we can embrace this new path and become something greater. Not just elves, not just humans, but dragon keepers united by our bonds and our purpose. Kyle felt Spark surge with pride and approval. Later that night, Kyle found Lyra sitting by the singing stream where they used to meditate. She looked up as he approached and smiled. So she said, you saved my people. We are not saved yet, Kyle said, sitting beside her. This is just the beginning, but it is a good beginning. Lyra said, better than I dared hope for. Kyle looked at her and remembered the joke proposal that had started all of this. Can I ask you something, he said. Lyra raised an eyebrow. When I jokingly asked you to marry me in that bar, he said, did you ever think it would lead to all of this? No. Lyra laughed. I thought I would teach you a lesson about making stupid jokes. Instead, you taught me a lesson about hope. They sat together in comfortable silence. Then Lyra said quietly, you know, my people take bonding very seriously. When a dragon bonds with someone, it is considered a sacred connection. I know, Kyle said, and there is a tradition. Lyra continued, that bonded pairs who work well together often become life partners, because the bond between dragon keeper and dragon is so deep that it naturally extends to bonds between keepers. Kyle felt his heart beat faster. Are you saying what I think you are saying? He asked. Lyra looked at him with those glowing green eyes. I am saying that your joke proposal is starting to look less like a joke and more like fate. Kyle laughed because it was absurd and perfect at the same time. So does this mean "You're accepting?" he asked. "Ask me again," Lyra said with that sharp smile. "But this time ask me properly." Kyle stood and offered his hand to Lyra, and she took it. "Lyra of the Silverwood clan," he said, "will you marry me? Not because of a joke, not because of fate, but because I want to spend my life bonded to you the way I am bonded to Spark. Because together we are doing something impossible, and I want to keep doing impossible things with you." Lyra stood and kissed him, and Spark and Ash and Ember all made pleased rumbling sounds. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you, Kyle Morrison. And together we will show both our peoples that the future belongs to those brave enough to change." In the distance, Kyle could hear the dragons singing, and for the first time since leaving the mining stations, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, home.